Jose, welcome to the Gnostic Media Podcast.
Thanks, Jan. How are you?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks.
I had a chance to meet up with you out in Philadelphia at the Free Your Mind conference, and you and I have been talking before that for what, probably about 2 years, I suppose.
Yeah, we've been coming back and forth like for 2 years now.
Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and what we're here to talk about today?
Okay, excellent. So I'm originally from Colombia. I came here like 17 years ago. I studied computer science and systems engineer, and I came here to work at the NYU Medical Center, where I worked for 4 years doing research in neuroscience and doing modeling of neurons. Uh, and after that, I just left and I have a master's in computer science from NYU. And I work in the financial sector now doing software, like trading software. Uh, and beyond that, I'm interested in everything and I like to study relationships between things and how in the world we end up where we are today. And that has taken me to from very unexpected paths, and I end up studying alchemy from all things. So from neuroscience to alchemy, and it's a strange path, but it makes sense in its own way, right?
It seems like all the paths eventually come back together.
Yeah, that's one thing that you start seeing and learning is that everything is interconnected and everything is related.
Well, why don't you start off by telling us? First, this is going to be an interactive interview, so why don't we start off by giving everyone your website so that they can follow along?
Okay, so my website is josemariabarrera.com, and the page we're going to be looking at is josemariabarrera.com/alchemy. So it's JOSEMARIABARRERA.com/alchemy.
And I think they need a slash at the end of alchemy too, so that it brings up that next page.
Yeah, probably.
So once again, josemariabarrera.com/alchemy slash.
Yes.
All right. So why don't you tell us what are the origins of alchemy?
Okay, so uh, basically, is really is unknown, right? But when you start researching this, it seems to go back to Egypt, and even the name, right? One of the main things for learning origins of anything is the etymology of words, and that reveals many things. So alchemy comes from alchemia, which basically means the art of Egypt, and because chemia, it used to be chem, is the Greek word for Egypt, and it meant the black earth. Because when the Nile came up, right, in the middle of the desert, and you have all the delta of the Nile, that was a black earth, right? So it means the art of the black earth. And one interesting thing about alchemy is that that's a pun on words because that's called the prima materia or the raw matter, right? And is the black earth, which is what you're trying to transmute into gold.
The prima materia, you're saying, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, it's interesting, right? Because it's just a game of words, and you're going to see again and again in alchemy that words have different meanings and multiple meanings, and is relationships between words and other words. Now, alchemy used to be an initiatic art, and it meant the royal art. Alchemy is considered the royal art, and it was the supreme knowledge that all the initiates used to have. So alchemy, it was considered the royal art, and it was the highest knowledge that people could get. And it was supposed to be an initiatic art, meaning that the secrets of alchemy were transferred from mouth to ear, generation by generation, and in an initiation ritual. Uh, Now, the next thing I would like to talk a little bit about is the origins of where it comes, right? And this the main character behind alchemy, or is supposed to come from the god Thoth in Egypt, which later on became Hermes, which is Mercury in Latin, right? The Roman Latin god Mercury. And Hermes was the god of commerce, of the shepherds, of banking, of language, of communication, of thieves, and of magic. So those are all the things that Hermes encompasses, and you'll see that all of them are related in one way or another, and they make sense. In the web page, if you go to the image number 2, what you're gonna see is a little image of Hermes, and he has a ram and a cock on his feet, under his feet, and if you see, he has a cornucopia on top of the ram's head. The ram means the intellect, right? So basically, what he's doing, in a way, if you see this image, is he's controlling or the ram's head, or getting the fruits out of the ram's head, right? Okay, so in the other hand, he has the caduceus, which is basically a stick with two serpents that go up, and then in some depictions of that, on the top of the caduceus, it has two wings, which you don't see here, but you see them on his head, on Hermes' head, basically. The next thing we can talk, if you want, is a little bit about Western alchemists and who are the main alchemists, and what is the importance of alchemy in history. So if you go to number 3, to slide number 3, what you're going to see is a set of images of famous alchemists. Now, one thing that is interesting is that this division of knowledge that we have today, right, where everything or everyone is specialized in something different and something else, is something that is new. And in the past, all fields were related, and just as we started talking, they were connected with each other. So people never said, oh, I am this or that, but everybody was everything, right? And you had these polymaths who were people that knew a little bit about everything, and science and religion and philosophy and all knowledge was the same at the end of the day.
Well, if you go back far enough, wasn't all of the classes that it was philosophy, which is the love of wisdom? So everyone studied philosophy, which all of the other schools came from that.
Absolutely. And if you remember, in the Oracle of Delphi, right, right on top of it, what it said was know thyself. And philosophy is the art of knowing yourself, and everything comes from there. So if you see in this image, right, when you talk about philosophers in the past, in many cases, philosophy and alchemy were equivalent, and hence you have the creation of the philosopher's stone at the end of the day, right? That is the inner knowledge, and so philosophers and alchemy are pretty much the same thing. And then if you see in this image, right, it's startling that we have this. Basically, we have this myth. We have created this myth that alchemy, when you look at in the past, right, is something that is about superstition and it's magic, and it's just things that people believe before the ignorant, primitive people that live in the past believe on, and then we have all these enlightened people that created reason and knowledge, right? And they are saints and have come today as scientists. But if you look backwards in time, you're gonna realize that everybody used to be a magician, and just as you see here, right? Like you see the main fathers of what today we call philosophy, right? Which is just a little segment of what philosophy used to be, right? Like Plato, Aristotle, all of them were alchemists, and they were initiated in Egypt. Then if you start coming forward in time, you start seeing that the fathers of the Roman Catholic Church, right, like Albertus Magnus and Thomas Aquinas, they were alchemists as well. and then you start coming back into more into the Renaissance, and then you find that artists that were religious, in quotes, artists, right, like Roman religious artists, like Botticelli or Durer, they were alchemists, and they were depicting in their images alchemical formulas. And from alchemy, you get a lot of things, right? One of them from Paracelsus is pharmacology. Like modern pharmacology comes from Paracelsus, and as he was studying and interpreting on his own alchemy, he created the idea of pharmacology, the modern idea of pharmacology. This is millenary. I mean, it's very old, but the modern idea of pharmacology comes from Paracelsus experimenting with alchemy, and and then here you see the icons of reason in our world, right? Like Boyle, were one of the biggest physicists.
Well, especially Isaac Newton.
Isaac Newton, exactly, which is supposed to be the head of reason, right? And everything comes from him. Well, he devoted most of his time to the study of alchemy and hermetism and hermetical arts, and even he has his own translation of the Emerald Tablets, which is the basic principles of Hermetism, right? So it's very interesting because we get this myth today of science, right? That is just the use of reason and the use of the intellect in a very particular way, and but it's a myth because once you start looking at the past, you start seeing that everything is connected and everything was at some point united and unified, and it made sense. Everything made sense. Now, in the Renaissance, a little bit after 2,000 years, or after 1,600 years or 1,400 years of the church being around, right? Most of the knowledge was basically destroyed or hidden or occulted, right? And as the Renaissance came and the Medicis and all the important bankers of Italy started to import things from the Middle East, then that's when the world regained the knowledge of the antiquity, right? But one of the things that they brought, right, like we think about the age of reason, right, of in Renaissance. In reality, what was brought mostly was alchemy and all this hermetism and the hermetical arts, and they were brought back. And even the Medicis, right, when they got they put in hold the translation of the texts of Plato and they gave precedence to translation of hermetical texts. So for them it was really important, and so that's a little bit about the history. Now, in the 19th century, Carl Gustav Jung, one of the parents of modern psychology, he was an alchemist, and he unearthed all these books from the 14th, 15th, and 16th century, and he reinterpreted them and rediscovered the idea of the subconscious, and all this comes from these ancient texts. And in the 20th century, what you have is the resurgence of that in art mainly, and in surrealism. So you have Marcel Duchamp and André Breton, and they were alchemists. And basically what they were doing was they were rediscovering alchemy and bringing it into art and showing the subconscious. So that's like a little 5-minute overview of how alchemy has come up to here.
What is the relevance of alchemy in history?
Well, and I think this goes connected to the basically. Let me put it this way: we at some point lost a very important way of knowledge, And that has been always the engine for change. And we have been left with just half of our brain, and with the idea that everything can be reduced, right? And everything can be taken down into language. But the source of creativity and the source of innovation, it doesn't come from reason. It comes from another part, right? That is the subconscious, and from the feminine side of the brain, allegorically. Uh, so and if you think there is even a word, right, like the Greeks used to call that the eureka, or the eureka moment, where things are just revealed to you and they come from an inner deeper nature, and are expressed, and all creativity and all big discoveries in humanity come from that side. And I think alchemy, at the end of the day, is the driving force behind that. And I don't think it's a coincidence that all these big personalities that we have just seen here came up with the ideas that they came with, right? I don't think it's deduction that Isaac Newton used in order to come up with his ideas of the laws of gravity, right? What he had was this harmonious system of thought where everything was connected together. And at some point, when you have all these ideas, right, and when you have studied many things, and you let your subconscious work on them on the passive side of the brain, right, new connections arise there that they cannot be described with reason. And that's the source of knowledge, of new knowledge and creativity. And I think that's what it means, order out of chaos, is you have a side of your brain, which is the passive side, which is the subconscious, that is very good at creating new relationships between things. And it works in its own way, and we haven't been able to understand it well today, right? We lost that. And, and I think that's the source of all important knowledge in the world, and all art, all good science, all good music, everything comes from there.
What is the purpose of alchemy?
If you go to image number 4, the idea, if you think about it, right, like what people say that alchemy is, right, is you want to take base metals and like lead and convert them into gold, right? Or what you want to do is you want to find the elixir of the eternal life and things like that. Uh, or some people say, oh, no, that's the origins of chemistry, right? When people were ignorant and superstitious, what they did is they did alchemy. But now that we're smart and intelligent and better than people in the past, now we have chemistry. Uh, so one thing is that, okay, is all these things, but is none of these things at the same time. So at the end of the day, the purpose of alchemy is to open the third eye. And that's an interesting thing, because is a concept that is not only from the West, and actually is very detached from the West, and is more common on the East. But that's the end purpose of that is to awaken your endocrine system, and learn how to manage your endocrine system at will, and awaken your third eye, and being able to put in balance your consciousness, and being able to see the world for what it is and know thyself. So it's the eternal knowledge of who you are and what you are, right? So I think that's the real purpose of this, and is the transmutation of base matter into gold, meaning what you want to do is you want to convert or take your consciousness or your head and activate your third eye, and being able to maximize the potential of your consciousness. Mm, so now what is interesting, if you look at these images here, all of them in a way have mountains, right, and have caves. All of them are related in one way or another. Basically, what it is an introspective work. if you think it like that. And basically is looking inside you for the lost stone. Uh, and that's what all these images mean. And interestingly, once you start understanding what is the purpose of alchemy and you start relating it to other things, you start seeing alchemy everywhere because you start going to museums and you go back to the past and you look at art from the past and especially religious art, and you're going to start seeing the same images and the same allegories everywhere. So that's the other part, right? Like, and so I was mentioning before that what we lost is a different way of knowing, and the purpose of alchemy in a way is to unearth that way of knowing. And if you think about it, in the West, we're very literal. Everything that we hear and everything that we read has to mean what it says, and is encouraged even more on us since we're growing up to take everything literally. And when you go to school and you get tests, you have to say what it said, what the text said, right? So basically, everything that we hear and take, right, we take it literally. And one interesting thing is when you start taking things not for what the face value tells you that they are, but you start creating connections among different things and reading allegories into that. Now, if you think about it, your subconscious is very good at that. So your subconscious is very good at associating or creating relationships between different symbols and things, and it's something that you do with your rational side, but you do it with your intuitive side, and it's something that you don't actively do. It's something that you cannot concentrate and try to find what is the relationship between this and this, but it comes from your subconscious. It comes from the other side of the brain. So that's the other part of this, right? Is alchemy, what it does is it exercises that side of your brain, and then it awakens that side of your brain. And I'm going to describe the mechanism on how that works. So if you go to the next image, right, in image number 5, what you're going to see is an image called the Reupload, which is the hermaphrodite, and it's that little dude there with 2 heads, a male and a female head. And this comes from a book called Azoth from Basil Valentine. Now, what you see here is this is a mandala, and we'll talk about mandalas later on. But what you see here is something that was called the alchemical egg, and it was supposed to be the flask where all the alchemical process happened, right? Now, if you look at it, what it is a skull, basically. And what you have inside is a description of the alchemical process. And the idea here is that what you want to do is, you can imagine that in modern psychology, one thing that we have today, right, if you see, is that to put it in modern terms, your brain has 2 sides, right? So we have the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. One is the rational side, and the other one is the intuitive side. One is the masculine side, and the other one is the feminine side, allegorically. And that is pretty much what you have here in this image. In this image, what it's describing is how to create the Reupload, or that's the alchemical wedding, the wedding between the king and the queen. And is basically how to create the balance between both sides of your head, or your hemisphere. Now, in alchemy, the idea is the transmutation of the metals from lesser metals into gold and silver. Now, this is an allegory, and what the metals represent are the different passions or aspects of your psyche. And the idea is how to tame them and how to learn how to balance them, right? And then if you see a rabbi, the hermaphroditical creature, he's standing on top of the dragon there, is how to tame and control your different passions. So it is about control. Alchemy is self-control, or we'll see later on, is in general is control. How to control your passions. Now, if you think about it, one another interesting myth that we have is that we are rational animals, right? But if you think about it, that's not what defines us. What defines us are our emotions. Uh, Humans in general, we're emotive, right? But we have been trained to disregard or ignore our emotions. And can you remember one time when you were growing up and you were going to school that anyone in school asked you how you feel? Do you remember that? Like in class?
No, I don't remember really.
Uh,
To be honest, it's been so long.
it never happens. Like they teach you about geography and history and all these things, but they never talk with you about your feelings, right? And they really never encourage you to have inner knowledge of who you are and why you feel the things you feel and how you feel them and why is that you feel them. You never get that knowledge, right? And if you think about it in a real education, uh, the first thing that you should learn is who are you, right? And a big part of that is your emotions. You are your emotions. You're an emotional being more than anything else. Now we have one thing that is language, right? And we try to create stories to describe everything that happens to us, either through our senses or through our emotions. But language is just a means to communicate that. But we're not defined by that. Is we're defined is by our emotions, because that's what we are. And so that side of the brain is dormant in most of us, and is being unacknowledged, but is there. And because we are that, right? Our raw nature, our prima materia is emotions, right? Is always there. But the problem is that our dragon is not tamed. So it drives us in many different ways. It takes us to wars. It takes us to take stupid decisions about everything, and then because we don't know how to control it, right? So let me tell you a little bit about what you see here in this image and how is this related. So the idea in alchemy is that what you want to do is you want to balance or reestablish your both sides of the brain and put them into balance. And that's allegorically, that's the meaning of the hermaphrodite that you have there. That is basically is a creature where both sides, right, both aspects are in balance, are intermingled together. Uh, Now, the metals that you see around, right, that represent the different emotions, as I told you. Now, if you go from left to right, right, what you have the lowest star that you have there, that's Venus, and then you have Mars, and then you have the Sun, and then on the top you have Mercury, and then you have the Moon, and then you have Jupiter, and then at the very bottom you have Saturn, right? Now, in alchemy, the different metals or the different planets are related to the metals. So if you see Mars represents iron, Venus is copper, Sun is gold, Mercury is mercury, the Moon is silver, Jupiter is tin, and Saturn is the heaviest metal, which is lead. And the whole idea in allegorically is to take these metals, the base metals, which are Mars and Saturn and Venus and Jupiter, and being able to transmute them into a higher metal, higher types of metal, which are gold and silver. And ultimately, when you do this, you create the Philosopher's Stone. Oh, now the other
Well,
interesting,
I
yeah,
wanted to mention one thing about that image. If you look at the
yes,
outline of the stars there
yeah,
with the Rebus coming down, standing on the dragon, and then you have the primordial mound there.
Right.
That actually also makes the outline of the mushroom with the skirt that the Rebus is wearing as the annulus.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because you see, this, and that's the part where I think that chemistry and alchemy are related together. Because that's the chemistry that the real alchemy refers to, right? Is the chemistry of the body. So at the end of the day, I think the mushroom is the symbol for the sacred chemistry, or the the sacred
Maybe the sacred experience that it's brought on, or the
is
well,
by the different chemical substances or compounds, in to put it in a Western medical tradition, right? That your endocrine system releases from, or when you activate your receptors in your brain, right? uh, and and you get this sacred experience, right? I think the mushroom is the symbol of that. Now, all these chemicals that the mushroom contains, right, are something that is internal, and you produce most of them or very similar to them, and that's why you can relate to a mushroom, is because you have receptors on your neurons that are able to tap into the same chemicals that the mushroom has, but it's something that is internal. So I think the mushroom is an exogenous substance that you can take and mimics what your body can do. And at the end of the day, the real secret of alchemy is to be able to release those chemical compounds in your body at will. And that's the ultimate alchemical experience, which you can replicate taking entheogens. So if you want, we can go to image number 6 now.
sure.
Now, here is an interesting thing, and is we're talking about emotions and how they're related to things, and how we're not talking about that today. Now, one interesting thing about uh, the monks from the church, right, and people in medieval times and later on in the Renaissance, was that they were obsessed with this idea of sin, and and in monasteries what they start doing, right, was they start creating maps of the different aspects of the psyche, and they created all these different relationships between the different aspects of your passions, and they put them together, and they create these beautiful, incredible maps about that. So one of them is this. What you see here is this is from a book that is a German manuscript. It's called Splendor Solis from 1582. And what it shows is something that they called in German is the Planetenkinder, which means the children of the planets. And this is related to astrology, right? And the idea is that every planet is related, or has the power to influence different aspects of humanity, or of human activity. So in these images, what you see is on top of each of them, you have like a little chariot pulled by different creatures, and each of those chariots represents one of the seven planets. Uh, Now, the seven planets, right, were the seven wanderers of the night that you could see with your naked eye in a dark night, right? So they were the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So those were the little white dots that you could see in space that didn't move regularly, but they were the wanderers because they have these weird movements in space, and they were connected to the gods, and they were supposed to have influence over different activities or passions from people. So what you see here is a depiction, and there are thousands of these depictions where you see the planet on top, and then at the bottom you see what they rule, or what the aspect of the psyche, or of social behavior that they influence. Now, these images, beyond that, there are chemical images, and what you see is the flasks in the middle, which are the alchemical eggs. Do you remember that we saw the alchemical egg before, where they are showing you how, and you see each of them is crowned, right? Meaning, when you find how to rule this, right? Ruling the different aspects of your psyche, and that's basically what the metals meant, which ultimately is based on astrology. Go to image 7, and I'm going to show you just a little bit of a little taste of what this means. So to take an example of this, let's look at Saturn. Now, Saturn is the Latin name for Cronus, which is the planet Saturn that we know today, right? Now, it's very interesting because the depiction of Saturn is an old man eating a child. Now, if you take this at face value, what you say is, oh, these superstitious, primitive ancestors of ours, they believed that there was this monster in the sky that used to eat its own children, right? Now, if you think about it, this is an allegory, and what Saturn represents is time. So Saturn eating, devouring its own children, it means time consuming everything, and everything comes from time. So it's not that they believe that there was this monster in the sky that used to eat its own children. It's that they had a very elaborate image of the meaning of time. And as you can see in the middle, right, you see a chariot on top with Saturn sitting there, and then on each of the wheels, what you have is two of the constellations of the zodiac, right? And at the bottom, you have what is the influence of Saturn. So if Saturn is time, right, what it represents, in another way to see it, is death, right? Because you have death comes out of time, because time consumes everything, and that's why Saturn has the sickle on his hand, the symbol of death. And if you think about it, then each of these planets, right, or each of these aspects, like the awareness of time, when you become aware of time, then it has different psychological aspects. It has, and it was usually related to two of them, which are the images on your right, from the middle, one on top of the other, and basically they were the psychological aspects of Saturn, or the awareness of time. One of them, or of death. One of them is the bad one, or the negative one, is greed, right? Because if you know that tomorrow is gonna come, right, and it's uncertain, and there's no certainty of what's gonna happen tomorrow, then you try to accumulate a lot, right? And that's greed. But then it also has a positive side, right? That is prudence. Because if you know that tomorrow things are going to change, then what you do is you save for the future, right? You take measures to try to avoid ill consequences coming tomorrow. The other thing that they had related to the planet, and you see that underneath that, were different, what they call the humors, and there were 4 of them, and this was melancholy. And that's an image, a very famous image from Albert Dürer, an alchemist. And basically is sadness. That's what it represents. And then for each of them, if you remember the image in slide number 6, each of them has an aspect like that, right? Like, so Mars, again in image number 6, the bottom middle, right? Mars is anger, right? That's and if you see is war. So you see there the chariot on top with Mars, and then at the bottom you have a war, right? Anger. And then the first one at the bottom, right, is Venus on the top, and then at the bottom, well, what you have is passion, and you have love. And now if you go to number 8, now you're going to see the different aspects and how it works. So that image there is another mandala, and we'll talk about the mandalas. That's an image from Bosch, and what it represents is the 7 capital sins, and then for each of them you have a virtue, right? So this is what I was telling you about before, that in monasteries they mapped all the different aspects of the consciousness, right, and of social behavior, and they associated them with different parts of your psyche and how they counterbalance each other, right? So from the top you have a Saturn is greed and prudence, right? Then you have Jupiter is gluttony and temperance. Then the Moon is sloth and charity, and then Mars. No, that's sorry, that's Venus is lust and justice, and then Mars is anger and fortitude, and then the Sun is pride and faith, and then the last one, which was Mercury, is envy and hope. And they have all these maps, and that's the other thing that is beautiful about studying this is you find so beautiful images, and all of them depict different aspects of the mind and so on. Now, the other thing that they did is they found what are the interactions of the different passions, right, and how are they related to each other. So if you go to image number 9, that's an image from Sandro Botticelli, another alchemist, and that's basically the seduction of Mars by Venus, right? So that's Venus and Mars, and how Venus renders impotent Mars. And you can see how these little creatures are playing with the weapons of Mars, right? And he's impotent at the feet of Venus. So that's interesting, right? Because if you go back to image number 6, I think, where we have the rabbis, right? It was 5, sorry, image number 5. You see on the left hand side, what you have is what we just saw here, Mars and Venus, right? Venus and Mars, and then on top the Sun, and on the other side you have Saturn, and on top Jupiter, right? Now this is interesting. What you see is if you have Saturn, right, which we saw is the anxiety of what's going to happen in the future, right? And if you remember Saturn in Greek mythology, Saturn, right, was dethroned by his son Jupiter, right? What you see, and Jupiter represents law, the law, right? And if you see what you see on the hand of the woman on the female side of the rabbi, what you have there is the square, right? Which, if you see in Spanish, this is called a regula, which means a rule or ruler. So Jupiter represents ruling, right? And
like to regulate, to rule.
To regulate,
sure.
exactly. So the way you render uncertainty impotent is by regulation. So if you create laws, what you're doing is you're eliminating uncertainty. So the antidote for uncertainty is creating laws. Now, this is an interesting symbol, right? Like you see the square here is also the sign of reason. And if you think about it, reason is the same word as ratio, right? And ratio is the proportion between two sides. And in a square, what you have is the two sides. So basically that's what I was telling you before, that is all these games of words and symbols, and they represent one thing and then another and so on. So this symbol, the symbol of the square, right? It represents the right angle, represents reason, represents ratio, which is the root of reason. Now, on the other side, what you have is the image from Botticelli that we saw, right? Is how Mars is rendered impotent by Venus, right? And then on the male side, on the hand of the rabbi, what you have is the compass, right? Now, interesting, and again is the game on words, right? Compass is the same word as compassion, compassionate, comes from the same word. So what you have is you can render anger, right, and rage through compassion, impotent, and you can render the fear of uncertainty and death through reason, impotent. So you start seeing how all these images start to interact with each other, and the more you look at them, the more things you find on them. And as you study the symbols, now the interesting thing about symbols, and here is where I would like you to go to the next topic that I would like to talk, that it would be image number probably 9. No, 10, sorry. Yeah, image number 10 is I want to start talking about mandalas and what mandalas are and symbols. So what we're saying about the different way of knowing, right, or of knowledge, and is the awakening of the subconscious, is that symbols, the power of symbols is that as you behold them and try to analyze them with your reason, right, what you're doing is you're impregnating your head with these images. But these images are acting on you, on your subconscious. So as you study them and as you learn more about the symbology of each of the different aspects of these images, and you contemplate them, and you spend time with them, what's going to happen is that all these symbols are going to start creating connections on your subconscious, and you're going to start finding relationships between the different parts of these images that you never saw before and never told you about them, but you start creating all these connections. So these images, in a way, what they're doing is they're describing the alchemical process, but as they're describing the alchemical process, what they're doing is they're enacting the alchemical process on your subconscious. And this is what magic is. Now, think about this. The problem is that today we have an orgy of images because you go online and you Google alchemy and you're going to get 1,000 different images, right? And then you're going to spend 2 minutes with each of them and then you move to the next one. But if you go back yourself and think about you're in the 15 or 1600s, right? And alchemy is prosecuted by death, right? So only the witches and wizards do this, and the Inquisition is chasing you. Imagine that you got a hold on one of these books, right? And these are manuscripts, right? So these are books that are not like, there are not thousands of copies of them, but you have very few. And imagine that you get one of these books, and they're forbidden, and you get one of these, and you study it at night. This is something really precious. When you look at one of these images, they're sacred, rare. And then you can spend hours with them. So you can imagine that just by that, this is going to put you into trance because they're sacred. And then if you start thinking about it, that's exactly the same thing that happened to the icons, like Greek and Russian icons. They were not only images or pieces of art, they were sacred sacred works. They were gateways to spirituality, and the mystics used to get in trance by contemplating these images, because what they do is they're incredibly powerful, but they don't act on your conscious side of the brain, but they act on your subconscious. So I'm gonna basically explain you or give you a little bit of what mandalas are and what is the basic architecture of mandalas. So they're usually in square, and within the square there is a circle and they have a focal point in the middle. Now what these are is maps of consciousness, or these are the maps of the universe. And what you can see is the square represents the 3D world, right? So what you have is usually in each corner of these images, what you have is one of the 4 elements. So in this one, in the one at number 10, what you see is this creature has 1 foot on the earth. the other foot is on top of water, and then on top you have fire, and you have air represented by the little bird, right? And then the salamander on the right, on the left side is in fire. So those are the four elements. So usually in the mandalas, what you have is two sides. Is the outside in the square. What you have there is the outside world, and then the internal part inside the circle represents consciousness. So it's the inner world. Uh, Now that's and that's the other thing. It percolates and it penetrates all language, right? That's the inner circle. The inner circle is what you see there, which is consciousness. Is the inside of your skull, and that's, do you remember the image of the mountain? It's referring to consciousness, to the psyche, to the inside, right? So we could spend hours here. The other thing that you see here is the both aspects of it, right? Like you see the king and the queen, the male and the female, right? Go to image 11. This is another mandala, and it's the same thing. You see the four guys on the corners, right, inside. Each of them has a triangle. Those four triangles represent the four elements, and you can see one is drinking water, the other one is like playing with the land. One on top you have fire and you have air, right? Now, the upwards pointing triangle represents the masculine, and the downwards pointing triangle represents the feminine. So when you see what is known as the Star of David, right? That is the Rabbi. That is the hermaphrodite. That is the alchemical wedding between the masculine and the feminine. And by the way, that's also fire and water, right? So that's the union of opposites. And that's what you see. And in the center, what you have is the earth, which is black, because close your eyes. What is the first thing that you see when you close your eyes? Darkness. So that's the prima materia, right? The raw matter, the prime matter. Now, go to the next one, number 12. And what you see is exactly the same image, but this is a Tibetan image. And you can see it's exactly the same architecture. It's a map of consciousness. It's a map of the universe. And it's the same thing. What you have in the middle is Bashara Yogini, I think it's called this goddess, and she's the goddess of initiation, basically of tantric initiation. And you see her inside the Star of David, right? And then on the outside you see the four figures, and it's exactly the same. And interesting, this talks about tantric initiation, right? And tantra is one of the Eastern arts, right, of meditation and contemplation. So what happened, and at the end of the day, is working with the chakras, right? And we'll see that in a few slides from this one. But what you have here, right, is the same process, and these images are used by Buddhists to contemplate and to enter into trance. So before they go to meditate, what they do is they contemplate on these images, and they basically get high on the images. Go to number 13. This one is what is called a Kalachakra mandala. Now, Kalachakra means the time wheel, or the wheel of time. This is what the Tibetan Buddhists venerate, right? And they have initiations on this particular mandala. And these initiations, the Dalai Lama does initiations on this mandala. And a lot of the knowledge of what it means and how it works, and all the process of breathing and so on that they have is secret. And you have to be initiated into this in order to learn it. Now, an interesting thing is, look at number 14. Now, number 14 is another mandala. But as you see, what they do, right, is temples are basically maps of the consciousness or of the body or the universe. And if you remember the previous one and this one, they're pretty similar. This just the other one was seeing the temple from the top. And if you see it, even the word temple, right? Like you have the temples on your skull, right, on your head. Uh, they depict your consciousness, and this is basically an intricate map of what your head is and what your consciousness is and how your mind works. So there is this very ancient knowledge of how the mind operates, and in the East, through initiation, right, people get it. Most people on the East that are Buddhists, right, they go and worship their statue there, but they never understand where is the depth of the temple, right? So they go to as pilgrims to these kind of temples, just like people go here to churches, right? And but they only see the exoteric side of it, and they only put flowers to the god, and then they leave, right? Uh, Now, by the way, if you see the Gothic cathedrals, right, they are also maps of the body and the unconsciousness. So they are embodied images of the psyche, and so there is a deep, very deep knowledge that people in the world have for thousands of years, and most people never see it and never see what it is. Let's go to the next one, which would be number 15. And no, actually, let's skip this one. Let's go to 16.
Sure.
Now, this one in the middle, what you see is again the same thing, right? So you have the four corners with four elements there, and then in the center, what you have is the black and white, right? The yin and the yang, which represents the alchemical wedding. And then what you have is circles, right? So what you have is the mediation of the external world into the center of your psyche. Now, on the outer circle, what you have is 12 images, right? And then immediately in the next one, what you have is 6 images, right? Which represent these different, like, people doing different things. Do you remember the planets, when we were talking about the planets and how they influence different parts of the psyche, right? And social aspects? Well, that's what you see here, right? It's the mediation of the psyche through emotions from the outside world. That's what you see here. And now, coming from the east to the west, if you go to image number 17, this is an image from the 17th century where you can see it's exactly the same thing. So what you have, let's start to take it to more known images on the west. So on the outer circle, where you have is the images of the zodiac. Now in the middle circle, in the one in between, what you have is different aspects of humanity, right? And then in the center, what you have is the child, which represents basically consciousness. That's the Christos. And on the outside, the four corners, right? Go to the next one, number 18. And then you start seeing, like when you see a Ptolemaic, the idea of the earth in the center of the universe, right? Earth is consciousness, right? Dark earth, right? The black earth. And what you have here is the mediation of consciousness from the outside world, right? From the external world. And all the different signs of the zodiac, right? And you see the spheres internally, right? Which is called the harmony of the spheres, and the different spheres populated by each of the different planets or metals. And finally, if you go to number 19, now you understand what the zodiac means and how it's interpreted and how is that the planets affect your mind, right? Because when you look at the zodiac, what you're looking at is an image of the psyche and the influences of the different aspects of your psyche and the mediation of those parts of the psyche through the senses, on the world, on the outside world, which is the four corners where you see here with the four stars. Now, next one, number 20, that's a mandala. And what you see there is the fourth elements on the corners and the fifth element or quintessence, the quintessence in the center, which is the Christos. Now, the fourth elements on the outside represent the four evangelists. At the same time, represent one of the signs.
Then they say Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John around them.
Yes. And what they represent, right, is there are different zodiac signs, and they represent something called the fixed cross on the sky. So in the zodiac, if you look at the zodiac wheel, you have...
They're representative of the four seasons.
Of the four seasons, of the four elements. And then in the center, crucified in the center of this cross, right, of the external world, of the elements, is consciousness. And that's Christos. So at the end of the day, all religion, right, and all this is a study of consciousness and how is that your mind works in allegorical terms. And what I want to show you now is how is the mechanism, or how is that this works, and how is the rest of the mapping. Now, in the next image, what you're gonna see is more mandalas, right? Image number 21. And what you have is that they're everywhere once you see and once you learn how to read them, right? So the Korean flag on top, the symbols around are the symbols of the four elements. And in the center, the yin-yang is the hermaphrodite, right? Or the union between the masculine and the feminine, right? So this is an image of enlightenment. The bottom line, the bottom one, right? You have the swastika in the center, which is a symbol of the wheel or of the yin and the yang, right? Like you can see the two S's there. And then in the middle one is the same. You see the earth in the middle, the caduceus in between, and then the wings around and the square around. So this is knowledge that is all over around us. And once you start decoding this symbology, you can start seeing it all over the place. Now, let's go to the next image, number 22. And I'll show you now how is that this is connected to the endocrine system and how this was studied and known a long, long time ago. So this is one of the most beautiful images I've seen. This is an image from the 15th century. And what it shows is how the different zodiacal symbols, right, are connected to different parts or aspects of the body, right? And you can see more detail of this on number 23. And in there you see again how is the different parts of the body, right, or your system, your endocrine system, are connected to, and it's allegorical, remember? So how your emotions are connected to your glands, to put it in Western nomenclature, right? So how your glands modulate your moods. So let's go to number 24. And then you start seeing, right, all the idea of the chakras, right? Or chakra, by the way, means wheel, right? And it's all these energetic wheels in your body, which in Western terms, you can see them as your glands, your endocrine system, right? And that produces all your hormones and regulates the different bodily functions, right? So what people have known for millennia is how these glands are connected to your emotions. And then you see here, and then if you think about it, if you go to the next one, number 25, this is a Chinese image, right? And it comes from a branch of inner alchemy in China that is called Neidan. And this is an image, if you can see, this is basically, that's the the skeleton of a person, right? And the different parts of the person and how it's connected to different aspects of energy, right? So right in the middle at the bottom of that, on top of the chariot, you can see the sun there, right? And different aspects of the moon and so on. So acupuncture and all the Eastern medicine, right, comes from these ideas as well, and all these energetic centers in the body, which, if you think about it, makes a lot of sense, right? Has nothing to do with superstition or any of these things. It's just uh, the way the body works in many ways. Uh, Now, to round up, what I want to show you, and this is a very interesting image, image number 26. That is Pan, and on its hand, what it has is in the middle, the core of that is Earth, and then you can see all the planets around, right? So that's the psyche. So that's how Pan hand on his hand, right, which is instrument, how he controls the psyche. Now Pan is supposed to be the son of Hermes, right, of Mercury. And if you remember, Hermes is the god of the shepherds. And what the shepherds do is they control and handle the cattle. And the way you do that is through your emotions. And so here what you see, right, is the animal side, how it's connected, right, to our glands, all this. How it is connected, right, through Pan's instrument, right? That's an ocarina. How do you call that in the Pan's instrument?
Flute.
Yeah, that flute, the Pan's flute. Now, if you think about it, music, right, is one of the best ways to modulate and regulate emotions. So what you have is all these studies, right, on how different emotions can be controlled through different means. So once you learn how to control this system, I think it has two sides or two ways that this can be used, right? So this tool, once you start understanding how the psyche works, if you know how to do it and you learn how to control your own emotions, then you can achieve enlightenment, right? And you can basically increase your knowledge and it benefits you. Now, if you don't know this, right, or if you know this but you don't tell other people, and other people are ignorant about their emotions and how they work, what you can do is you can control them. And then think about the different aspects of Hermes, right? So he's the god of the shepherds. Okay, so shepherds control cattle, right? We just saw this. He's the god of language, right? So if you start thinking about the sophists, right, and how to use language, because if you think about it, the ultimate instrument for control, right, and is language, because we humans are wired in a way that we have the power to create hallucinations on others just by the fact of creating words. So if I say the word giraffe, what I just did is I created an image on your head of a giraffe, right? I made you hallucinate through the invocation or of spells, which is the other side of this, right? Hermes was the god of magic. So you start seeing how all things are related. And then the last one, but not least, right? Commerce and banking. So all the tools of control and communication, right, were ruled by Hermes, which is the head of alchemy. And alchemy is the science that studies how to control emotions and how to regulate glands. So if you see the last image on the presentation, number 27, what you have there is that's called the Sikh king. And what the Sikh king has, right, is his heart is controlled by the 7 metals. And this is an image, and actually this text comes from a book from Carl Jung, and it says the sick king from whose heart the planet children receive their crowns. And as you remember, Carl Jung, father of psychology, right? The pupil, and he broke with Freud, right? And and basically this knowledge has been around for millennia. And so how to control emotions ultimately, right, is the way you control the heart of people and the minds of people and how you control society. I think that's my presentation, Jan.
Great, Jose. Well, thank you. I appreciate the wonderful presentation. It's very enlightening.
Yeah, I hope my heavy accent and my nervousness is the first time I do this. They don't show up too much and interfere with the core concepts that I wanted to show you here.
Why don't you give out your website one more time? And you know what I'll probably do is I'll probably put the audio of the interview to the pictures and post a video up of it as well, so that people can just follow along on a YouTube video or something.
Okay, yeah, we can do that. So my email is Barrera Jose, BarreraJose @yahoo.com, and the images of these are in Jose Jose Maria Maria Barrera Barrera.com/alchemy. And thank you so much, Jan, for having me here.
All right, Jose, thank you so much.
Okay.
Well, why don't you start off by telling us, well, first, this is going to be an interactive interview, so why don't we start off by giving everyone your website so that they can follow along?
Okay, so my website is josemariabarrera.com, and the page we're going to be looking at is josemariabarrera.com/alchemy. So it's JOSEMARIABARRERA.com/alchemy.
And I think they need a slash at the end of alchemy too, so that it brings up that next page. So
yeah, probably.
So once again, josemariabarrera.com/alchemy/.
Yes.
All right, so why don't you tell us what are the origins of alchemy?
Okay, so basically it really is unknown, right? But when you start researching this, it seems to go back to Egypt, and even the name, right? One of the main things for learning origins of anything is the etymology of words, and that reveals many things. So alchemy comes from alchemia, which basically means the art of Egypt, and because chemia, it used to be chem, is the Greek word for Egypt, and it meant the black earth. Because when the Nile came up, right, in the middle of the desert, and you have all the delta of the Nile, that was a black earth, right? So it means the art of the black earth. And one interesting thing about alchemy is that that's a pun on words, because that's called the prima materia, or the raw matter, right? And is the black earth, which is what you're trying to transmute into gold.
The prima materia, you're saying, right?
Yes.
Jose, welcome to the Gnostic Media Podcast.
Thanks, Jan. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks.
You know, I had a chance to meet up with you out in Philadelphia at the Free Your Mind conference, and you and I have been talking before that for what, probably about 2 years, I suppose.
Yeah, we've been coming back and forth for 2 years now.
Why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background and what we're here to talk about today?
Okay, excellent. So I'm originally from Colombia. I came here like 17 years ago I studied computer science and systems engineer, and I came here to work at NYU Medical Center, where I worked for 4 years doing research in neuroscience and doing modeling of neurons. Uh, and after that, I just left and I have a master's in computer science from NYU, and I work in the financial sector now, doing software, like trading software. Uh, and beyond that, I'm interested in everything, and I like to study relationships between things and how in the world we end up where we are today. And that has taken me to from very unexpected paths, and I end up studying alchemy from all things. So from neuroscience to alchemy, and it's a strange path, but it makes sense in its own way, right?
You know, it seems like all the paths eventually come back together.
Yeah, that's one thing that you start seeing and learning is that everything is interconnected and everything is related.
Okay.
Now, it's interesting, right? Because it's just a game of words, and you're gonna see again and again in alchemy that words have different meanings and multiple meanings, and is relationships between words and other words. Now, alchemy used to be an initiatic art, and it meant the royal art. Alchemy is considered the royal art, and it was the supreme knowledge that all the initiates used to have. So alchemy, it was considered the royal art, and it was the highest knowledge that people could get, and it was supposed to be an initiatic art, meaning that the secrets of alchemy were transferred from mouth to ear, generation by generation, and in an initiation ritual. Uh, Now, the next thing I would like to talk a little bit about is the origins of where it comes, right? And this the main character behind alchemy, or is supposed to come from the god Thoth in Egypt, which later on became Hermes, which is Mercury in Latin, right? The Roman Latin god Mercury, and Hermes. Was the god of commerce, of the shepherds, of banking, of language, of communication, of thieves, and of magic. So those are all the things that Hermes encompasses, and you'll see that all of them are related in one way or another, and they make sense. In the web page, if you go to the image number 2, what you're gonna see is a little image of Hermes.
Philosophy, which is the love of wisdom. So everyone studied philosophy, which all of the other schools came from that.
Absolutely. And if you remember, in the Oracle of Delphi, right, the right on top of it, what it said was "Know thyself," and philosophy is the art of knowing yourself, and everything comes from there. So if you see in this image, right, when you talk about philosophers in the past, in many cases, philosophy and alchemy were equivalent, and hence you have the creation of the philosopher's stone at the end of the day, right? That is the inner knowledge, and and so philosophers and alchemy are pretty much the same thing. And then if you see in this image, right, it's startling that we have this. Basically we have this myth. We have created this myth that alchemy, when you look at in the past, right, is something that is about superstition and it's magic and it's just things that people believe before the the ignorant primitive people that live in the past believe on, and and then we have all these enlightened people that created reason and knowledge, right? And they are saints and have come today as scientists. But if you look backwards in time, you're gonna realize that everybody used to be a magician, and just as you see here, right? Like you see the main fathers of what today we call philosophy, right? Which is just a little segment of what philosophy used to be, right? Like Plato, Aristotle, uh, all of them were alchemists, and they were initiated in Egypt. Then if you start coming forward in time, you start seeing that and he has a ram and a cock on his feet, under his feet, and if you see, he has a cornucopia on top of the ram's head. The ram means the intellect, right? So basically, what he's doing, in a way, if you see this image, is he's controlling or the ram's head, or getting the fruits out of the ram's head, right? Okay, so in the other hand, he has a caduceus, which is basically a stick with two serpents that go up, and then in some depictions of that, on the top of the caduceus, it has two wings, which you don't see here, but you see them on his head, on Hermes' head, basically. The next thing we can talk, if you want, is a little bit about Western alchemists and who are the main alchemists, and what is the importance of alchemy in history. So if you go to number 3, to slide number 3, what you're going to see is a set of images of famous alchemists. Now, one thing that is interesting is that this division of knowledge that we have today, right, where everything or everyone is specialized in something different and something else, is something that is new. And in the past, all fields were related, and just as we started talking, they were connected with each other. So people never said, oh, I am this or that, but everybody was everything, right? And you had these polymaths who were people that knew a little bit about everything, and science and religion and philosophy and all knowledge was the same at the end of the day.
Well, if you go back far enough, wasn't all of the classes that it was philosophy?